What's up, everyone? Looks like we're live now. We'll give it a few more minutes and see if we have some more people joining. How's everyone doing today? Just so everyone's aware, the chat has been set to subscribers only. You should still be able to just immediately subscribe if you want to say anything in the chat. But and then obviously, if you don't want to stay subscribed, if you just have something to say and you want to unsubscribe, then go right ahead. You can unsubscribe after. But I'm trying to limit any spam in the chat because like there's spam bots all over YouTube. So um, yeah, so just make sure you subscribe real quick if you wanna talk or if you have any questions for me. All right, so let's see here. How many? We're at 140. Wait for 200. Should just take a second or two. I guess I could go ahead and get into a bit of, I have like a little bit of a monologue before you guys start asking questions. So there is a lot of big changes going on in this part of the world right now. We've, in the first 6 months or so, we saw Russia launch a special military operation in which they um, took their army of contract soldiers that they're legally allowed to deploy under Russian law in other countries, and they invaded Ukraine. It's been very back and forth, obviously. Most recently in the war, the tide has kind of turned. The Ukrainian side has been taking back ground at what to the Russians should be an alarming rate. So in response to that, Vladimir Putin has announced a mobilization of Russian forces and Russian reserves. They're looking at about 300,000 troops and allegedly another 70,000 volunteers on top of that. That are now training up and will soon enter the conflict. We have other big developments. We have a new commander that is taking charge over the special military operation, and his name is Sergei Surovikin. A little bit of background on him. He was formerly the commander of the Russian Eastern Military District, so that would be the Russian Far East, I believe. So this region, there wouldn't have been, uh, I mean, currently Russia is very friendly with China, very friendly with Mongolia, friendly with North Korea at the moment. So there's not really too many threats in this region outside of Japan. After he was the commander of the Eastern military district of Russia, he became the commander of ground forces for the Russian effort in Syria. So, those of you who don't know, there was a civil war in Syria in 2014, and it was not going very well for the Syrian government in the beginning. The Russian government is very closely allied to the Syrian government, so they stepped in and intervened in Syria to help the government win the war. And during that time, I believe it was 2017 when Surovikin uh, took over the operations in Syria. They actually made a lot of big gains, and he managed to help the Syrian government recapture somewhere north of 50% of the territory in Syria. So he was very successful in his operations in Syria. Most recently, he was announced and he was moved to commander of Military District South. So the Caucasus and basically this region of Russia here, including Crimea. And I believe he was named commander of aerospace forces of the Special Military Operation, in addition to being the commander of the Southern Military District. So this is a guy that has a lot of military experience of late, and he also has it seems to be a well performing commander. So the last bit of big news that has come outside of mobilization, Ukrainian counterattacks, a new commander. Just today, there was a strike, or it was actually a bombing of the Kerch bridge that connects Crimea to mainland Russia. And that bombing took place somewhere on this span right here. I'm actually going to turn off all of the stuff so we can see it here. There's actually 3 or 4 separate bridges here. Although they look like they're connected, I've recently come across some images of the bridge under construction, but you have a westbound road lane, an eastbound road lane, a westbound rail lane, and an eastbound rail lane. And they're all actually, the spans are actually built separately, even though on the surface they're connected. That way is actually a good design. Although, one of the things that's clear here is that the Kerch Strait Bridge is not as strong as the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson, right? But it was designed with a bit of foresight. By separating the spans of the bridge, it means that in a circumstance like of today where there was a bombing, only one of the spans of the bridge was actually taken out, while the other 3 were virtually unharmed. There is damage to the eastbound roadway that leads back to Russia, but there's already road traffic that's flowing across that bridge, and then there's also damage to the rail bridge, but it's mainly due to the fact that while there was a truck, let's just pretend that this is the truck right here on the bridge. The truck exploded and it knocked out several spans of this bridge here, and obviously did some like shrapnel damage to this bridge, and it some of the shrapnel caught a hold of an oil tanker up here, which exploded and burned, which would have poured molten liquid all over the rail bridge. So it certainly would have weakened it some, but it's not something that's unrepairable. And in fact, they've already sent at least one train across the bridge, and I'm now reading that it was a test train to test and see what the weight would do. You know, to the bridge and how it would stand up to it. So this is a huge development in terms of like the war. The entirety of I guess you can say, the southern thrust of the Russian side. So everything, I would say, from here all the way to Kherson, this is all supplied through the Kerch Strait Bridge. So this is a huge threat to the operations of the Russians in southern Ukraine, and it could be a big opportunity depending on how long this bridge is taken out and how starved of supplies the Russians are in this area currently. It could be a big opportunity for Ukraine to strike south towards Kherson, towards Melitopol. Let's go ahead and get our places back on. Obviously striking south to Kherson, to Melitopol, and at that point recapturing the land bridge that connects Crimea and Russia. That would be almost a complete defeat in the war for Russia. So this is a very bad situation for Russia. It seems like over the past couple weeks, it's been bad news after bad news after bad news for them. But we'll see if Ukraine has the strength to really capitalize on this. Uh, the, in regards to the counteroffensives, it's kind of been suspected, and I've heard some explanations for why Russia is so short on troops, and I guess we can go through the options here. So like 1A, Ukraine is telling the truth, and they really have killed 61,000 Russian troops, which would mean, 3 times that are wounded. So over 200,000 Russian troops have been killed in the operation so far. I find this to be the least likely of all of the possibilities. I don't think that, 200,000 Russian troops have been removed from combat due to injuries and death. But we'll just say, for argument's sake, that's the pro-Ukrainian view on it. Another possibility here is obviously sending troops home on rotation. So, we had some information that a lot of the Chechenian forces actually, after the capture of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, returned back to Chechnya for the second half of the summer. And then the third possibility is that, and I find this one the most likely because it actually is partially factually correct. But a lot of these contract troops that Russia has, they sign up for continue, like every 6 months they re-sign their contract, right? And in January, their contracts were supposed to be up, but the Russian government extended them without any kind of option to those troops on the ground. They said, like, we're about to launch an operation here. Your contracts are not up until August. So all of the Russian troops of that group of 350 to 400,000 that had signed contracts to fight, they, had no option after that point. They had already signed the contract. Russia, basically canceled the exit date on that contract and then forced them to keep fighting through that. So they didn't do the same thing when August came around. When August came around, a lot of these soldiers had the option of uh, going home because the contract was up. And the idea is that a lot of them took this option, and as many as 50,000 Russian troops that were manning the front in different locations actually took that option. Of course, they've been fighting a war. They've been fighting a war for 6 months or so. Obviously most people would take the option to go home. So this actually starved the Russian side of manpower, and the Ukrainian side very intelligently took advantage of the opportunity to press back in the various points on the front line where the Russian side was weakest. Of course, when you look at the battlefield and you say, okay, we don't have enough troops to defend this entire front line, we have to pick and choose what are the most important parts, right? So important for the Russian side, we're going to use green right now, is the land bridge. So this front line right here, turn our transparency up, that allows Russia to connect to Crimea via land bridge. This is the absolute most important part of the battlefield right here. So the city of Mariupol is basically, the main target for the Ukrainian side. So defending this front line would have taken absolute priority. Second priority is obviously the Donetsk line. Donetsk is the largest city that was formerly a part of Ukraine. It's about 1 million people. So and it's the capital of basically the separatist movement and the resistance. And you can argue Lugansk, but it's not nearly as big of a city as Donetsk is, and it's very close to the front line. But the difference here with this part of the line is it's mostly covered by Donetsk People's Republic militia, so it's not really as much of a concern. It's very well entrenched. There's very low possibility of the Ukrainian side actually breaking through here. So the next part of the line that's most important would be the Kherson front, and the reason for that is Kherson is the second largest city that Russia managed to capture since the beginning of the operation, and the largest city that they managed to capture relatively completely undamaged. They basically swooped into the town and captured it without a fight compared to the other fronts. So after these fronts were covered and they had the supplies and the troops that they needed, obviously you want to protect your most recent gains here around Severodonetsk. That basically leaves the last front line, the Kharkiv front line, um, that at the time was around in this area here, it put it very low on the totem pole. In terms of what they had to prioritize and not. There's only one city within this front line, perhaps two cities that really could have been considered of real strategic importance. The Kupiansk being the main one. Kupiansk was a major railroad hub that transitioned troops to basically this entire area right here. Izium would have been the second. Izium represents a bridgehead beyond the Seversky Donetsk River that could have allowed Russia potentially to envelop the Donbass in some kind of double envelopment, double pincer move. So that pretty much catches up to modern day. It seems like Russia's trying to reverse the situation with the mobilization, although we have not seen anything to suggest that this reversal has started. Yeah, it appears that the Ukrainian side is still taking ground. They still very much have the momentum in their favor. They probably are experiencing a boost in morale as well as a boost in support, be it whether it be political and even military support from the West. There has been a slight increase in the amount in monetary terms of the amount of equipment that's being sent to Ukraine over the last weeks, probably due to the success of these offensives here. All right, guys. So I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. I'll try to answer you guys' questions in the chat. Remember, super chats are going to take precedent. So if you want your question answered first, that's the way to do it. Otherwise, I will be answering the ones where I'm tagged in first. So make sure you get your questions in. I'm going to try to keep this around an hour, by the way. So, and thanks for everyone that joined, by the way. There's 500 of you, 550. So, yeah, we'll predict AFU offensive from Zapper. Yeah, thanks, Christopher Cousins. I have been predicting that for some time, although there has not yet been a Ukrainian offensive on the Zaporozhian front line yet. However, a successful Ukrainian offensive in this area could spell like an absolute defeat for the Russian side. So. No, Putin's not. Thanks, no one. But Putin is not. I do not see. I do not see any likelihood of a nuclear conflict anytime soon. I think there's just a lot of saber rattling at the moment. Kerch Bridge is now a partial submarine. Ukraine didn't see it coming. All right, Lexoka, what impact, if any, do you expect the midterms or the 2024 presidential election to have on U.S. support to Ukraine? I would say that. Oh man, it's tough because it's the administration that supports it. Although Congress does have to approve the funding, and there's complete support from the Democratic side in the United States. There is majority support, I would say, from the Republican side, but mainly because of public polling on the war. If public polling, like say if Ukraine started to obviously lose the war, I think the majority of the conservative side of the base, they're far more likely to say, okay, this is bad, we need to stop throwing our money into a pit, and they would be more likely to cancel or put a lot more pressure on sending aid to Ukraine. So it could potentially, if it goes far in favor of the Republicans, and if they retake the House and the Senate, and then Ukraine starts to lose, then you could see probably a big. Probably a significant drop in monetary support, although their political support is going to be there almost indefinitely, I think. New World Econ, Alberto Z. Thanks, Alberto. Do you think Russia can do an offensive from Belarus to Lutsk region and tried to cut Ukraine from its Western allies. Now, this is a possibility. So we have seen some information recently from Ukraine and also from statements that Belarus has been making. But Ukraine has been saying that Belarus is preparing its rail lines, its various different rail connections to receive large amounts of troops. At the same time, there's military camps that are being set back up. This is a sad attempt at a military camp. Look at this. This is a tent right here. There you go. Military camps that are being set back up in Belarus, as well as Russian fighter jets that are now landing at Belarusian air bases. So it's, I see this as like a real possibility. However, an attack in the Lutsk region would be risky because you're bringing the war zone very close to let's move in here. Very close to Poland and NATO borders, which is going to at least at the very least make the Polish government and the U.S. government like scream a lot louder about how the U.S. or how Russia needs to stop the war. So imagine a drive on Lutsk here. You're probably going to have immediate targets being Koval and Sarny and Rivne being one. Let's go ahead real quick, guys. I'm gonna switch to this other map because it has rail lines on it, and I want to give you guys a good idea of what the targets will be. Okay, so yeah, definitely the main targets are going to be uh, Koval. That's the wrong one. Sorry, guys, I haven't played with this map in a while. And then Sarny at this point. So, an attack towards Sarny wouldn't necessarily. It would probably be a lot safer than Koval, to be honest with you, because it would put more distance between Poland and the war zone. Like the last thing you want is any artillery or anything accidentally falling across NATO borders, right? Like especially if you're Russia, like Russia doesn't want NATO involved, and NATO doesn't want NATO involved. NATO obviously wants to see Russia lose, so they're going to provide as much support to Ukraine as they can to make that happen. But in terms of actually becoming a party to the fight, they have no interest in becoming a party to the fight. So, in this particular situation, possibly a push on Sarny, and expanding a zone of control around here and then a further push to Rivne would severely cripple Ukrainian rail logistics in the eastern part of the country. So like if you can imagine like taking over, damn it, if I remember how to do this right, like say taking over this part of Ukraine. Would probably like really cripple the situation. I mean that in my mind, it pushes them far enough away from Kyiv to where like they would be tougher to reinforce if you're the Ukrainian side. Like obviously or for the Russian side, the closer you get to Kyiv, the easier they are going to bring. The easier it's going to be to bring in reinforcements because it's a huge railroad junction. It connects to all different parts of the country. So. Like this would be managing to capture this territory from Belarus would probably be like out of the park success for the Russian side, I guess you can say. We'll go ahead and reload this. All right, we'll go ahead. We'll move on to the next question if there's more questions. All right, guys. I see that some of you guys are trying to get points across in the chat, but like, please try not to spam. Like, I am reading the comments, but it takes takes forever for them to come through. Chris Compton, thanks for the 5, man. Good to see you, man. Sorry about the YouTube monetization. Thoughts on General Petraeus comments that there is nothing RF can do if you success is inevitable. So I actually saw the video that you're talking about, and I'm glad you asked a question about it. In terms of the YouTube monetization, I think what it is a glitch. There was some, like Dennis Davidoff and Arthur Ray, like posted up videos saying that they got demonetized because they reported on the Ukraine war. I don't think it's true because I wasn't demonetized. Um, so. It looks like YouTube's sending out messages to everyone that there's like a glitch in the system in terms of like putting monetization on videos and stuff. So thanks for the thoughts though. So General Petraeus gave an interview, I guess on NBC, and Petraeus used to be head of what was it, like the CIA or Homeland or something like that, like one of our foreign policy institutions, and he basically said that at this point success for the Ukrainian army was inevitable and there was absolutely nothing that Russia could do about it. He's so full of shit. Like I mean he's like definitely just throwing out some big talking points in support of the Biden administration for the midterms. Like so like I mean it's I mean and that's what I got from it. And like the biggest takeaway from what he said uh, was when he was asked about the response that America would have if Russia were to, detonate nuclear weapons in Ukraine. This is what the news anchor asked him, right? Like, what would America do if Russia attacked Ukraine with nukes? So he said that America would immediately enter the war and move to destroy all Russian ground forces within Ukraine and to sink the entirety of the Black Sea Fleet. Um, I mean, probably one of the most irresponsible things you could ever say. Like, he was basically saying that um, in response to Russia nuking Ukraine, which has no guarantees from NATO or the West would basically start a nuclear war with Russia. He wasn't saying that we would destroy Russia's forces within Ukraine with nukes. He said that we would attack them with conventional weapons, which would almost certainly cause Russia to react in a situation where they start attacking us with conventional weapons. And a conventional war between Russia and NATO turns nuclear really fast. There's virtually no scenario where it doesn't turn nuclear, in my opinion. There's some people that would disagree, but under Russia's nuclear doctrine, they are allowed to use nukes if there's a threat to the existence of the Russian state. And in my opinion, Russia is not comparable with NATO in terms of military capabilities, or especially not, it's not comparable with the US in terms of military capabilities. And while a lot of these European nations are pretty weak militarily, combined they have enough to add to the US capabilities that like we really I mean Russia really wouldn't stand a chance on the ground. So that would basically trigger a scenario where the Russian existence is under threat, and they could use nukes, and then we would use nukes, and then the world would end. So, my thoughts on General Petraeus, he needs to not say shit like he's been saying. That's my thoughts. Thanks for the question. All right. Try to, when you guys ask questions, try to make sure you tag me because it's way easier to see. I see a lot of. I'll try to go through and answer them, but like, how far do you think Russia will advance if the counteroffensive ultimately happens? Thanks, Mangmung Tunglet. I think in my opinion, it appears like Ukraine has put most of its forces on the line of contact within Ukraine in the south and in the east. So if Russia were to start another incursion near Sumi or Chernigiv, they would probably capture quite a bit of territory before they were stopped. That's to do that real quick. JJ Wang, where are the Russian Air Forces? They should not allow Ukrainian counteroffensive. We've been hearing from the Ukrainians themselves for like 2 months now that Russia has moved nearly 1,000 various air assets to the borders of Ukraine. So you're talking about close air support, your CAS, and fighter jets, and potentially even strategic bombers, which probably only means like 100 of them or so. But and then several hundred helicopters have been moved to the border too. As far as I know, they've been pretty dormant. But the Ukrainians are the ones that keep talking about it. So um, assuming they're not using them to blunt these Ukrainian counteroffensives, they could be saving them up for some kind of Russian offensive. I don't know. I don't know. All right. Moving past Chris Compton's 5. Thanks again for that. Tonix Ton, is it possible for Russia to accept a defeat? I mean, nothing's impossible, but I would say that accepting a defeat to what most Russian people would see is like an inferior foe in terms of like obvious, not like on a personal level, but in size of their military economy and population, would I mean I think it would probably result in a collapse of the Russian state, and I don't think that's very far fetched. Do you think Russian Air Force will ever appear? I think I just answered that. Maybe. Um, we have a new commander. Who is we? I don't know who we is, but Russia has a new commander of the um, SMO. It's Sergei Surovikin. I'm not part of we. I live in America. How do you think Russia will retaliate to the terrorist attack on the Kerch Bridge? This is big because there is a lot of like pro-Russian channels that are pretty upset about this. If you guys don't follow these pro-Russian channels, I mean, I completely understand because I know there's like some people that support Ukraine, and you know there's some people that support Russia, way more that support Ukraine than Russia, but like a lot of the Ukraine supporters don't want to like even look at the Russian stuff because it's propaganda. But a lot of the Western media has actually been, if you start reading Western media articles, they cite these Russian sources all the time, and the stuff that they've been talking about is absolutely fascinating. Like if you you know are interested in seeing the reverse side of the situation and seeing how like they react to things. But um, you know, Russia suffered defeat after defeat in the last month or so, and I mean these channels have just been going kind of crazy over it, and basically what they're talking about now is like there has to be some kind of retaliation for the Kerch Bridge, or Putin's position is going to be under threat. Whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. But that's they said that about Kharkov, and then Liman happened. They said that about Liman, and then Kherson happened, and then now the Kerch Bridge situation's happened. Like Russia, has been under some pressure to do something about the situation for some time, and we're yet to see it. Um, how do you force someone with a gun to keep fighting? That makes no sense. Well, I mean, you should watch Enemy at the Gates. Great movie. It might be a little bit dramatized, but apparently it happened. It happens all the time. A lot of fear is involved in that. A lot of people think that you just turn around and shoot the guy that's forcing you to run into the fight, but um, you know, there's a lot of fear involved. Like if you shoot your commanding officer, we're not just going to shoot you. We'll like torture you first or something. I don't know. I don't know like if you're referring to anything specific. I'm just saying. There's many different ways. All right, here we go. We got some tags. We're War Sage, New World Econ. If Russia does regain the ability to go on the offensive, where do you think they would aim for? Well, after supplying and reinforcing their front lines, there's probably three different directions, maybe four potential ones, and I'll name them in terms of like likelihood. So the one that people have been talking about most is an offensive here in the Zaporozhye region. I'm not exactly sure what this would do um, tactically immediately, but like just bear with me, if they can capture Zaporozhye and put a new front line like something like this up to Pavlograd, then they would they would once again put this Donbass area in threat of like some kind of pincer or encirclement. So this is potentially like one possibility here. Um, Another one that's been talked about a lot is the Sumi area. So like Sumi is I mean, it's kind of important because it's a big rail connection. There's actually several big rail connections in the area up here. But if Russia were to attack here, the Russian or the Ukrainian lines are pretty weak in this area. A lot of the border guards and troops that were defending this area have been committed to the offensives throughout the different areas of Ukraine. So coming into Sumy Konotop is a possibility. And we'll consider this the same as like the Chernigiv possibility, like if they came at Chernigiv here. But the issue with entering Ukraine here to the north is this is like the most sparsely populated part of Ukraine, so capturing territory here it can be relatively easy, but holding on to it and defending it can be difficult. Like there's not many roads. You have a couple like larger towns that are like spread out, and potentially there would be like a lot of partisan activity in this area. And it like there kind of was at the beginning of the war when Russia had already previously invaded this region one time. Another possibility is like towards Mykolaiv out this way. However, I think that this situation needs a lot more stabilizing unless Russia's managed to sneak more forces and equipment to this area than we thought. Not wanting to reveal that equipment was there when this assault came from the north here, which I highly doubt that possibility. But Mykolaiv and Odessa are definitely within the war goals before the war ends. And then finally, the last one, but I mean, maybe not in this order. I think a counterattack towards Chukoyev is very possible as well. If Russia can manage to seize some of these crossroads here and then seize Chukoyev, they would I mean, they would exacerbate the supply situation for these Ukrainian troops in this area. Last we heard, there was 40,000 Ukrainian troops just along this line right here. There's probably more than that if you consider what's up to the north here. And they would all have to get their supplies and retreat through Izium and Liman, which are there are no bridges left in existence. They're all pontoon bridges. So like, um, you know, instead of a flow of equipment, you're looking at a trickle on pontoon bridges. So those are like the four. What I see is the four possibilities for where a Russian offensive could be if it does take place. We'll say. Thanks for the question. La Habitis. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna call you La. Atrapada, Atrapado. Do you think the Russian Air Force will ever appear? Okay, I answered that. Do you think Russia will annex more land of Ukraine? Yes, I think if they can reverse the situation. You know, obviously, like they've annexed the territory that they have. They're not seeking peace at this point. To me, that says that they want more. I don't know. Do you think rain season will halt Ukrainian offensives? It appears that, like in some circumstances, it's already starting to slow down. Even in this most recent Kherson offensive, the main thrust of it came down the roadway. So it came down through and it broke Russian lines. Let's actually do this in different colors. It broke Russian lines through here, and right. I'm pretty much like straight down the road, but it didn't really like they'd previously tried to attack in some of these places like Arkhangelsk and Viskapelia and near Novovisinsk and didn't really have that kind the same kind of a success. So like I don't know, like it's very possible that we're already seeing like some negative effects from the rain. Not anything like, whole companies of armored vehicles getting stuck in the mud, but heavy rain, like preventing aviation from flying on the Russian side. Like that's one of them. The Russian side was unable to thwart this counterattack with their aviation because of the rain. So like there was a negative aspect for the Russians. But even up in this region here, the Russian side supposedly bought a couple days of time because there were heavy rains that created like a couple days of heavy fog in the region, and Ukrainian drones were unable to operate and scout out the lines and find where the weak points in the Russian lines were in the direction of Svatova. So I guess that gave the Russians more time to fill in these gaps and re-equip and bring in reinforcements to their line, maybe. Alex Shapiro, do you know when new Russian forces from mobilization will start arriving at the front line? The only information I've seen so far that suggests is actually in this region that we're talking about, Alex, right here near Makivka. One of the latest Russian Rybar reports stated that there were 200 mobilized reservists guarding the front somewhere to the east of Makivka. Other than that, I haven't really, there's no definitive information that any of them have entered the battle zone yet. There is some information that there are training grounds set up somewhere in Lugansk and Donetsk. So probably in this region here, maybe even this region here. There are training grounds where some of these reservists are being trained, so you could say they've already entered into the area. But I think maybe another week or so, probably of training bare minimum before any of them will be ready. I mean, some of them might be ready. I'm not in Russia. Okay. So guys, I'm gonna have to move just to the ones that people have tagged me on, because there's a a lot of questions now. So if you have a question, make sure you're tagging me. You see all the people in the chat put the @ New World Econ. Do that. Agnieszka Gill, how many troops Ukraine has at the moment? Any idea? I don't think they have a million, like which is what they've said. I think maybe in terms of like total amount of like local militias, military, police forces, which are like a big part of what Ukraine is trying. Like Ukraine, the whole country is under martial law. So like similar to like how you've seen like Russia announce mobilization, and then you have all these people trying to flee out of Russia and like get across the borders. Ukraine went through a very similar thing at the very beginning, and in order to prevent that from happening, you have to lock down the borders that aren't under threat as well as the ones that are, and then you have to like impose some kind of military martial law in each city and town throughout the entire country in order to control the population, make sure that people aren't running away, that they're showing up for mobilization and things like that. So I mean, I would say in terms of like regular army, like on the front lines, probably around 450, 470,000 troops, which is like the number that the Russian general staff has given. That sounds about right to me. When you include um, all these various military police forces and then border guards on all the other borders of Ukraine, it's probably closer to like 700,000 to 800,000. I don't think I doubt it. I highly doubt it's a million. It might be like I mean, if there's definitely a possibility that Ukraine has several, 1 or 200,000 troops actually in training right now that aren't ready for the front line. It's definitely possible. So in that case, it would be pushing a million, but I think frontline troops probably like around 450,000. Raymond May, you're gonna have to like explain your question. How many generals, commanders have Russia had? Is that good or bad? Oh, like how many commanders have they had over the operation? As far as I know, I mean, in the beginning of the operation, there were like probably like there were different thrusts coming from different directions, and each one had their own commander. And then at some point, they appointed an overall commander, Gerasimov, I believe was his name, and now he has been replaced. So two overall commanders looking over the entire operation. Now, some of the Russian sources are saying that Surovikin this is actually the first time they've consolidated the whole operation under one commander, and I don't. It doesn't seem true because it seems like Gerasimov was definitely in charge of the whole thing, but it's possible that he was just overlooking the Donbass Arc operations over the summer. War Sage, if the Russians gain the strength to go on offensives, do you think they'll make a go from Kharkov, from Belgorod, or focus on the east? I don't know. Just so you guys know what he's talking about, like the primary buildup of Russian equipment is here in Belgorod region. This is where satellite images as well as Ukrainian intelligence have seen like the most Russian soldiers deployed to is like basically across this front line here, and then up into Kursk as well. So it's definitely possible. New World Econ, is the collapse of the Ukrainian government possible? It's of course it's possible, but like if it's imminent, I don't think so. I don't think it's imminent. I think it's possible. Like say if theoretically Russia were to be able to successfully launch a new offensive and defeat some, put some major defeats on the Ukrainian army before winter. Now you're looking at a real possibility. Like I mean, if Ukraine loses the war, I don't think they lose the war without the government collapsing first. If you ask me, I think and that's the way it should be. Like if you're losing, you have to do everything you can to make sure that like well, you have to make sure you're doing what you can to not lose, and you have to at least think at some point, like, well, maybe it's our leadership that's the problem. So, like, they'll go through the phases of, like, say, we're losing on the battlefield, let's replace the military leadership. Okay, that's not working. Let's replace the political leadership, like those kind of things. So I mean, when you say a collapse in government, that's what I see, like a collapse in like the ruling party of Ukraine. So like Zelensky's government, but like as in terms of like a complete like collapse into lawlessness, I don't know. I think the military's got a pretty firm grip on things at the moment. Russia will find it hard to surprise attack from the north with the level of surveillance intelligence they get from NATO and the USA. I mean, yeah, like surprise attack. Uh, I mean, it depends on like the definition you mean, big A. Um, I mean, it wouldn't be an outright surprise, but like the Ukrainian attack on Balaklia wasn't a surprise. Like the Russian channels and government were talking about it for weeks. It's just that they didn't have the forces or troops in the area to do anything about it. And like that's uh, you know supposedly like what's going on like in the Sumi region. Like there's a lot of information that's suggesting that there's not enough Ukrainian troops to hold the border in these regions. Like they've all been redeployed for these counteroffensives, which I do think are important. Like if you have momentum in Kharkov and Kherson, you have to try and capitalize on that momentum, and you have to pull troops from where you got them. So, uh, I mean, the most recent rumors are like they've taken troops off the line in Sumy. They've also completely removed the Odessa garrisons and moved them to the front in Kherson. This is just what I've heard. Whether it's true or not, obviously you guys determine the truth for yourselves. But I agree. I mean, there is a significant amount of intelligence sharing, so a true surprise attack would be difficult to conduct in today's day and age. Do you think the tech sanctions have hampered Russia restocking advanced equipment? Sure. Yeah, of course. Um, it just depends on how much they had stocked beforehand. And I mean, like if anything, it's probably hampered a Russian high-tech economy. but like it's not like Russia is completely incapable of developing any chips whatsoever or buying any chips whatsoever from the international market. Like they definitely develop some of their own chips, and they definitely still buy some chips and even some pretty advanced chips. The problem is that like with sanctions, it's kind of like cutting off all these different opportunities and options and stuff. So like it results in situations where like you have to like smuggle stuff in, or you have to make backdoor deals with like some countries to get this stuff, which I'm sure Russia obviously, I mean, I've recently seen footage from inside missile production facilities inside Russia that look to be producing missiles, and they just opened up two new production lines in the Russian Far East. Where exactly they are, I'm not sure. Like maybe in Irkutsk, or somewhere in one of these regions, maybe Krasnoyarsk. I'm not really sure, but there's a factory that just opened up that's it has a one production line for Su-35s and another production line for Su-57s. So you're looking at a 4.5 gen fighter jet and a 5th gen fighter jet, each with a capacity of 30 units a year. So, I mean, that's 60 high-tech jets worth of um, chips, which isn't like a substantial amount of high-tech computer chips, but certainly enough for Russia to smuggle in through their various partners, through their Chinese. Obviously China like is getting high-tech computer chips for their fighter jets somewhere, and they probably don't have any quarrels, you know, against selling them to Russia. But there's certainly different areas where you can see a bit of a struggle. Like probably like drones is like the main one. They're having to go do some wild stuff to get some drones, like going to Iran and different places. Why Russia doesn't attack bridges over the Dnieper River with Islander? How it's Iskander. Sorry to correct you, but how hard is it to destroy bridges? Do they need bombers? So Kerch Bridge versus Antonovsky or the Dnieper bridges. Uh, there's possibly a difference in terms of like the Dnieper bridges might be over-engineered. They were built in Soviet times, so like way too much. Like there were like in modern times, like if you hire a construction company to build a bridge, you're gonna say, hey, here's $1 billion, build a bridge, and then that construction company is going to find out how to build the strongest bridge possible, um, for the least amount of materials and cost. That way, out of that $1 billion, say like, if they build the strongest bridge in the world, it might take them $900 million to do it, and they only profit $100 million. But if they build a bridge that's good enough to get the job done and last for 50 years, like the contract says it's supposed to, then they could probably do that for $600 million and pocket $400 million in revenue, right? This is like more of an economics question, where like these things were not taken into account in the Soviet Union. Like it was more or less like, how do we keep as many people employed as possible was like the main thing. It's the main part of any legitimacy of any communist government, right, is employment. And that's what you see in China now. So like it's beneficial to take as long as possible to build the bridge, so like building it real good, building it real strong, real sturdy. Using more materials means you have to mine more materials, which keeps the miners busy for longer. The longer it takes to build a bridge, obviously the engineers are employed for longer. Like so like I guess you can argue that these Dnieper bridges are tougher than the Kerch bridge, on face value, like almost definitely. But I mean, I'm not saying that the Kerch bridge is like a weak bridge by any means. It was, I mean, looked like a pretty big explosion that took it out. Um, I'm not entirely convinced that you can take out one of these bridges pretty easily with Iskander missiles. I mean, you probably could, but it would probably take um, a dozen, or maybe more, Iskanders striking in the same place to take out one of these bridges. For reference, there's a bridge right here that is both a railroad bridge and a road bridge that connects north and south Odessa regions. It's right here. It's actually a big supply route for military equipment coming from NATO to Ukraine. It comes from Romania. Russia's probably struck this bridge 15 times, and they haven't recently, which tells me like the last time they struck it, like finally, you know, it's going to take some lasting repairs to get it going again. But Ukraine was repairing it in a week, then Russia struck it again another week. They'd strike it again. They never really managed to completely destroy it with missile strikes. A truck bomb's a different thing. Obviously, you can park a lot more explosive power in a truck bomb. Zarathustra, do you think we may see Syrian volunteers? They said that back in like April, and I haven't seen any yet. So, I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, maybe though. Like, it looks like Russia is trying to put pressure on at least Belarus and some of its allies to bring troops in. I mean, I would think the most tempting offer is like this offer that I think that North Korea has publicly given Russia, like to loan them, like 100,000 troops to use in the fight in Ukraine. Um, I mean, I would think if Russia wanted to bring in foreign fighters, they would take that offer all day long from North Korea. But the problem with Syria is still fighting its own civil war. So, it's not likely that Syria would want to send too many fighters to Russia. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there probably are some volunteers already that have snuck back to Russia with some of the Russian units that fought in Syria, but not in any kind of quantity. Like there's not like a Syrian brigade operating in Russia. Oh, hey, Jay Smith. What's up, man? Thanks for joining the chat. Looks like you still have moderator capabilities. I gave it to you a while ago. Um, Christopher, are you able to articulate what you think of the overall goal of the Russian Federation at this point? Do they want of all of Ukraine, just the land bridge, or whatever? Um, I mean, certainly the land bridge is imperative for security of Crimea. I mean, Russia see like geostrategically, and they're not wrong for seeing it this way. Like if you look at Russia, I mean, it's a vast open basically marginally productive land, like very marginally productive land. There's not a lot of value in it. It's a very poor country historically, and there's not really a lot of good rivers in Russia either, which are very important in terms of like creating wealth. So like for creating wealth, like for a country to be successful, and this is put best by Peter Zion in one of his most recent books, but like imagine like a cookie. You want to have borders that are crunchy, right? So like mountains, oceans, like whatever, like borderlands that can actually physically separate you from the other nations that are around you. And then you want the center of the country to be like gooey, right? Like so like a good cookie, but like take America for example. Um, is separated by oceans to the east and west, mountains to the south, virtually a satellite country in the north, people that are culturally the same as Americans. So like it's very secure, good crunchy borders. And then the center of America is dissected by the longest internal navigable waterway system in the entire world, and longer so than every other nation in the world combined. So the Mississippi River system is like freaking 20,000 miles of coastline that you can actually move ships up and down. So this is what you'd call natural infrastructure. So it means that the people, in Chicago, they're floating boats downstream to people in Louisiana. That means there's more interaction between the peoples of one place and another. It means more shared culture, more shared values, like um, a stronger nation is what it is. Strong culture results in strong nation. So like that's the kind of the idea. And America's a good example of that historically. Despite the problems facing recently. Russia does not have the same opportunity. Like there's two good navigable rivers in Russia. One connects like Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Kazan, Samara, and Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, all together in the same waterway, which is good for like these core populations of Russia, but it empties into the Caspian Sea, which is landlocked. So like this doesn't provide any international trade or economic opportunities for Central Russia. The Dnieper, however, is a navigable waterway as far north as Kyiv. Like you can look in Kyiv here, you have there's actually a port in Kyiv. A lot of people don't know that. Kyiv's basically a seaport. And a lot of these cities on the Dnieper River are seaports as well. So, like, Kyiv can actually move goods by water, or Ukraine can move goods by water from basically this entire part of central Ukraine and even getting into Belarus all the way down to the Black Sea, which gets to the Mediterranean, which goes to the ocean, which enables them to sell goods on the international market for cheap. So having a river like this is good for internal stability as well as external economic opportunities. So Russia is looking to better their borders, make their borders crunchier, so get up onto more geographic borders, as well as potentially better their economic situation. So I think, with that being said, this is a long roundabout way of getting to this, but I think that uh, you know, any any chess players in the Russian government are looking at this like pushing up against the Dnieper River is probably the best outcome for the situation. It would give them a river that separates them from potentially hostile powers, as well as the ability to use the river for economic purposes. Chris Compton, thanks for the 5 again, buddy. NWE most balanced channel on YouTube. Thanks, man. That's actually the goal I'm looking for. I really do try to bring an objective view to these things. Good call on the disclaimer before your videos. Are RF doomed in Kherson before January? Thoughts on Musk peace plan? All right. Yeah. So I mean, so real quick to cover the Kherson part of it. I think that, I mean, my opinion on the situation here is that, like, Russia seems to have prevented its troops in northern Kherson from getting encircled and destroyed, which is very good, which means that, they might have lost some forces in battle in this region here, but they were able to consolidate their lines further back, which actually would have increased the number of troops they have per square kilometer on the front line. So potentially the defensive situation that they're in now is better than it was potentially. Now, I mean, it depends on like what else Ukraine has to bring to the fight here. Like if they have a couple more strong offensive pushes left in them, but you know, over the next month or so, like the weather is going to gradually get worse in this part of the world, and I think that the time frame for capturing Kherson is very, very quickly slipping from the Ukrainian side. So, like, if they can't capture it before the rains make things too muddy and then the snows start, then they're not going to capture it over the winter. And by that time, Russia's probably going to have more than enough time to reinforce it. So. That's my thoughts on that. In terms of Musk's peace plan, I mean, you can debate about like the semantics of it, but like I think like the thought, like the heart behind it was like, um, you know, obviously like war is bad and we need to find a way out. Like I commend him for being one of the only people in the entire world that's using their platform to say, like we need peace, because there's no one on the Russian side saying that and there's no one on the Western side saying that. So like very brave thing for him to say. But I mean, I think like the basics of like what he was saying was he was trying, I mean, neither side would be happy with that peace deal, first of all. So like it doesn't make him like pro-Russian, because Russia obviously would never allow anyone to like rehold the referendums in these occupied areas. Like it's just completely out of the question. They had the referendums In their mind, it's already done and over with. This is part of Russia. So Russia obviously doesn't want that peace plan. Ukraine doesn't want that peace plan either because it means formally recognizing some of these territories as Russia, which they will never do, supposedly, even if they lose the war. Or at least that's what the West is saying. So um, I think that it actually took in mind the feelings of the people that lived in these regions of Kherson, Zaporozhye, which is very important because these are the people that have suffered the most from the war so far. Like the war zones have been, basically across these front lines and then to the north as well. So taking into the taking into account the opinions of those people rather than the opinions of the Ukrainian administrative government or the Russian administrative government, like let's like directly ask the people but like hold the referendum in a UN format where there's international observers. I think is a good idea. Now, like there's definitely arguments against that, like say like the regions have already been significantly depopulated, like a lot of Ukrainians have fled. Of course, like you can still that doesn't mean you can't hold referendums. You can like, I mean, I'm sure the Ukrainian government has records. You can find those people internationally and somehow find a way to get ballots to them. Although it's very unlikely that the Russian government would ever agree to a referendum being held via like mail-in vote or something like that. It's, I mean, it's like all in all, the peace plan he presented was impossible, but um, I don't know. It makes both sides unhappy, which is like the best you're going to get in a situation like this, honestly. I mean, it was the best peace plan I've seen proposed um, by anyone so far. The Russians, like their idea of a peace plan is Ukraine surrendering, and Ukraine's idea of a peace plan is Russia surrendering, and neither of those are going to happen anytime soon. So like, I don't think that he really deserves criticism from either the Russian or the Ukrainian government, in my opinion. Bravo. I mean, I was happy to see it. Good for him. All right, let's see. I've missed some questions here. Try to go back. Would Russia use AT-AT if they existed? Probably, probably. Thanks for that. I enjoyed that question. That was good. I mean, Russia would certainly use TIE fighters if they existed. Um, they could use a couple swarms of TIE fighters. Supposedly, Ukraine would be using the X-wings. Of course, you have Mark Hamill, that's like, in charge of like me. I guess is in charge of like propaganda. He's like the main actor they've hired for propaganda for Ukraine. So, which is very smart, by the way. Like, like the rebellion versus the empire. It's very good. I'm very much pro rebellion versus pro empire, so I can see the appeal in it. What would Ukraine need equipment wise to keep up the pressure and pushing back Russia back to beginning of February 2022 lines? I mean, they really, I mean, just like the same things we've been talking about, man. Like armored vehicles, HIMARS rockets, like is a big one. But like this, like the big problem here is like the availability of these things in the West. Like there's really um, isn't like a huge surplus stock of these weapons in the West. Like like most of it, like like eventually the flow of these things is going to diminish to Ukraine just based on the fact that like we've used up the stockpiles. Now, like a lot of these arms companies have like ramped up production, which might be helpful, but they have like big orders queued up from these various different NATO countries as well, because like a lot of this money that the U.S. has been spending isn't actually going to Ukraine. It's going towards arming Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, and then eventually Germany. And then you have to think about the southern NATO members like uh, Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Hungary as well are probably trying to buy a lot of. Everyone's trying to buy military equipment right now. So it's going to go to whoever has the money. Do you think Moldova should join Ukraine and attack Transnistria while Russia is busy in Ukraine? Oh, I mean, I think Moldova wants to do whatever they can do to stay out of it. Like I honestly, I don't think Moldova has any desire to I mean, obviously they would want like Transnistria to be part of Moldova, but like, the Moldovan government like has enough problems as it is. Like, there's a very sizable population. Like, I'm not going to say it's anywhere close to half, but there's a sizable population of Moldova that speaks Russian and is, you know, not necessarily like pro-Russian, but pro-good relations with Russia. Like, and that's also like one thing you have to keep in account about Ukraine, like pre 2014. Like, they accuse like a lot of people of being pro-Russian per se, like we want to be part of Russia, and there was never really anyone in Ukraine that wanted to be part of Russia. When they meant pro-Russia, it was like pro-Russia versus pro-Western. Like, they would rather have good relations with Russia than good relations with Europe. Like, that was the fight. It wasn't pro-Russian versus pro-Ukrainian. It was pro-Russian versus pro-Western, and they somehow they twisted the narrative into pro-Russian versus pro-Ukrainian. Pro-Ukrainian meaning Ukraine is inherently part of Europe. Information is fascinating. Is there any way of establishing near accurate Ukraine troop losses? No. No, not at all. What's your take on ammo stockpiles for both sides, especially Russia? I mean, I think I like the West and Ukraine has been talking about how Russia's going to run out of weapons the entire war, and it hasn't happened. So, I think Russia's got more weapons stockpiled than any country on the planet. The quality of those weapons is in question, and of course, like, everything depreciates. So, like, ammunition first off depreciates a lot, but like, I don't think they have any, like, they're not upset about firing old ammunition. Like, it's one of the things, like, if you guys uh, have seen videos of grad launches, typically you're supposed to sit in the cabin of the truck, and there's a button in the cabin of the trunk to launch the grad launches. But if you watch all these videos of Russian grad launches, they never sit in the truck. They get out of the truck and they bring a cord over, 100 yards to the side, and then they hit a button and they launch them from the side. So, like, they're doing that because the possibility that one of these old grad rockets is going to blow up in the barrel. That's one of the reasons why they're doing that. And sometimes you see videos where they are sitting in the truck, maybe like they know they have a new batch of ammunition. I don't know, but like, I mean, I think Russia's gonna, whether it's old or new ammo, they're gonna fire it. As Poland has provided volunteers weapons and ammo to Russia's enemy, would it not be reasonable for Russia to push up close to near Poland? I mean, maybe. Like, the more the war goes on, the less likely I see it that Russia wants to occupy all of Ukraine up to the Polish border. Like, I think, like, Vinnytsia, Zhytomyr, Lviv, Lutsk, like, this part of Ukraine would prove more trouble to the Russians than what it's worth. And they would probably be happy with some kind of defanged Ukraine that basically took up this area that agreed to never join NATO. So, like, basically a neutral Ukraine that took up this area right here, because then that would give Russia the buffers that it needs between them and their enemies. Russia probably wants a buffer with Poland, or with the West, rather than being pushed up on Poland. Probably. I mean, I don't really know. I'm not in Putin's head. Do you think that the peace negotiations at the beginning of the SMO had any way to peace, or they were just wasting of time? That's why they were stopped. Um, so I mean, there's two rumors here. Like, one, you're definitely onto one of them. Like, I think that definitely, like, the Russian side would have preferred at the time to keep fighting the war and keep taking Ukrainian territory, because, like, I didn't think that what they captured was sufficient for them. But at the same time, there's also rumors that Boris Johnson was the one that really, you know, threw that deal under the bus and made the Ukrainians give it up. And basically, what it was like Russia would, pull its troops back, and Ukraine would give up Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea, and then in return, um, Ukraine would never join NATO, but it would get some security guarantees from the West and Russia combined. So like everyone would guarantee the independence of Ukraine together. But apparently Boris Johnson was like, if you take this deal, we're not going to guarantee your security. So Russia can attack you again, basically. And then Ukraine was like, all right, we're not going to take it. Grigoris, by the way, 2 battalions of mobilized soldiers entered Kherson region. What make me think they start to appear to the front lines? I haven't seen that information, but 2 battalions is only 2,000 troops. It's possible. It's possible that keep in mind that Russia called up 300,000 reservists, and like I said at the beginning, there were a lot of contract soldiers that had expired contracts and went home in August, and it's very possible that some of those guys got called back up again. So they would have been combat ready, battle ready, and they could have been sent right back into the fight. Also, there's when you think about these reservists, some of them have served more recently than others, and I think it's like kind of regional as well. Like they tend to keep these units together. Like if you're from uh, Voronezh or if you're from Volgograd, then you're probably going to be in a unit full of lads from Volgograd. And if these guys served 3 or 4 years ago in the Russian army, like they would only need a couple weeks refresher course, and they could already be ready. Whereas some of them might need a lot more work and a lot more time than others. So I would think that it would be measured on a unit to unit level on like which ones were ready for combat or not. Yes, the Kerch railway bridge is still working, Ian Ram. Uh, do we know if Ukraine is still having a lot of troops being trained in NATO nations? As far as we know, yeah. I don't know of any particulars like how many troops are abroad, but there's definitely training going on. What will Russian response be to the pipeline sabotage? Will a similar attack be expected against Ukraine? Like sabotage against the pipelines that go through Ukraine? I thought they would get blown up long before Nord Stream was. So that was a surprise to me. But yeah, I don't think those pipelines are longed for this world. I will say this, guys. I'm gonna cut this off in 12 minutes. Hour and a half. There, we met in the middle. I usually do 2 hours. I wanted to do an hour. I'll do an hour and a half for you guys. Try to get your questions in. Do you think Russia will make new equipment in their factories like T14 and T15, or will they continue making T90s and upgrade old tanks? I'm about to show you guys. You guys are privileged. I've seen T14s being used in training grounds in Russia. Allegedly, this is video of T14s in training grounds of Russia. So let me download this video real quick, and then I'll show you guys. So supposedly T14s, a number of them have already been produced. Where? I swear I saw that video the other day. Sorry guys, I thought I shared it. I'm gonna have to look real quick. I think I can find it pretty fast because it was very recently. Some of these channels just post way too much shit. All right, well, maybe you guys will just forgive me and take my word for it, but I did see a video. Aha, I got it. I got it right here. I got it right here. Sorry, my apologies. All right, so this is a T14 Armada, the most recent Russian tank, and supposedly it actually has it's like got some stealth capabilities, so like you have to be much closer with guided anti-tank missiles to even target it. So like targeting this tank at a range of 5 kilometers is like kind of out of, it's kind of not an option. Um, and on top of that, it does have active countermeasure systems. So I don't know. Like the U.S. has countermeasures on their tanks. I don't know if the Russian tanks it's the same, but like basically, if it sees a rocket incoming, it'll launch out kind of like a flare or some kind of spread to discharge the rocket before it hits the tank. So active countermeasures, some kind of active or radio camouflage signature, and on top of that, the turret is um, remote. So like there's no soldiers actually operating in the turret. Like all the troops are in there's 3 operators and they're in the bottom of the tank, and this greatly increases the survivability of tank crews. So like if the turret were to pop off or explode, supposedly the troops in the bottom can still survive. Which is a very big deal when it comes to tanks. There's no other tank in the world that's been designed like this. So I mean, this is one of the very few uh, newer pieces of Russian equipment where I've actually heard some opinions come from U.S. and NATO personnel where like they were actually worried about it, like in its capabilities. So, but this is a shot of it. Not really too much to see there, but it is definitely a T14 Armada tank. And there is a lot of video of reservist training on T90s as well, which we haven't really seen very many of in the war. We've seen some, but the vast majority of the tanks that Russia's been operating have been upgraded T72s and T80s. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question, Drunk Bear. Okay. I'm gonna try to move to the bottom and get some of the more recent questions. I'm sorry if I skipped over your question. Remember, I mean, it's up to you, but like if you super chat and stuff, I'll get to those first if it's that important to you. How long the United States supports Ukraine? How much support does Americans give to Ukraine? I mean, Americans are very much, you know, we can be distracted very easily from things. So if Ukraine starts losing the war, I imagine that the support will drain along with it. What happened to the Minsk Accords and how may this affect the final settlement? I mean, it's funny actually. Like Elon's peace deal was very similar to what like the Minsk Accords were offering. Basically, allow Lugansk and Donetsk to determine their own future. You know, but the Minsk Accords were never implemented. Can Russia supply its troops in southern Zaporozhye and Donetsk through Berdyansk and Mariupol via Rostov? Yes, they can. And just I actually read in the last week that the Mariupol port had reopened, so I imagine that it probably will get some supplies via Rostov. Although the rail line going through Crimea is much faster. It would be cheaper actually to move the stuff by water, but it would be faster in this situation to go by rail. When do you think the real number of casualties will come out? Maybe never. I mean, after the war, like whenever the war ends, hopefully, um, some UN organization can go in and actually get a good estimate and tell everyone what the real cost was. But I imagine it's going to be a disgusting figure. If mobilized soldiers don't make any difference and Russia keeps losing ground or stalemate, will Russia begin to destabilize? Yes, but I don't see I don't see adding more manpower to the situation is not making a difference. I mean, I think it would make the biggest difference in the situation. Um, why is Russia so silent after Putin signed the incorporation of the territories? I thought they would increase the tone, but even with the bombing of the bridge, they're silent. I agree. And I don't know if we should be concerned, like if there's going to be some huge Russian action before winter, or if I mean Russia is like potentially already destabilizing. I don't think so. I think that Russia, I mean, if Russia had freedom of speech and freedom of media, then it would definitely be stabilized already because there would be enough information flowing around to the Russian population where they would not be supporting this. Whether that information be real or exaggerated. I mean, you guys you see it here in the West how information gets around, but I mean Russia's got pretty firm controls over things in what their population knows. So I think that I honestly think destabilization of Russia is pretty far off. After banning all opposition parties and bringing all media into line, would you call Ukraine an openly fascist state? Um, No, I would just say that because I mean fascist states like that's not like what you would really don't want to answer this question. I mean it's like I mean I see Russia and Ukraine as being very much equivalent in terms of like a lot of these like human rights and liberal like what like liberal democracies see as like right and wrong. Ukraine and Russia both very much buck those trends, like pretty equally. Like and if you'd ask me, I think that like people in Russia actually have the capability to get more information and different information than the people in Ukraine do. Just based on like what I've seen on like Russian Telegram channels, like there is quite a bit of criticism of um, the Russian government and Russian military in those channels. Despite the fact that they largely support like Russia in the end. But I haven't really seen a lot of the same in Ukraine. Like I mean, but Ukraine it is in a much more desperate state than Russia is. Obviously, they're getting attacked by a bigger neighbor. Many thanks for the excellent unbiased coverage. You are welcome. What happened to the Russian Terminator AFVs? They've been used a couple times on the battlefield, but I've yet to see any pictures or video of one that's been destroyed. So I don't know. Maybe they're effective, maybe they weren't. Why doesn't Russia take out Ukraine's 19 bridges on the Dnieper? Wouldn't that make it nearly impossible for Western weapons to reach front line? It would make things difficult, but I mean, they're strong bridges. We talked about that. They're very strong bridges. Can you please extend why the cellular network still isn't working? I wouldn't think that the Russian military would have taken a system down so the Ukrainians can. Oh, the Starlink network. So this is the only post I'm about to show you guys something from the Telegram channel. This is the only post I've seen that can actually explain really what happened with Starlink. Um, this is a new Russian electronic warfare system that's designed to suppress satellite communications. And there was a separate map that came out that showed the areas specifically where Starlink wasn't working. It wasn't working in this area on the Zaporozhye line, somewhere around Liman, and like it was not working in very specific locations where the Ukrainian army was trying to push, which tells me it probably was some kind of targeted electronic warfare. The way that these Starlink satellites work is like, I mean, the satellites just orbit around, and you take a dish, and you just the dish calibrates and tries to point and find a satellite, and then you have connection. So like the fact that the areas where these satellites where these dishes weren't working were very specific and targeted areas, really to me only suggests some kind of electronic warfare interference. That's the only thing I really think it could be. What NFL team do you support? Denver Broncos. Let's go, man. Got to keep with the home team, you know. Tonix Ton, thanks for the 25, man. Really, really appreciate that. Ashan, which side can have the edge over the other during winter, Russia or Ukraine? I mean, they're both saying they have the advantage over the other. I mean, I would say the Russian side probably has the advantage moving into the winter time. Mainly because the Russian population is like, yeah, unless they're in the border regions, like within range of within like 80 to 100 kilometers, where Ukraine can go after power plants and stuff. Most of the Russian population is insulated from the war, whereas Ukraine, I mean, Russia could very easily, like they've already demonstrated, to go around and just start taking out power plants, start taking out, um, you know, gas turbines and like whatever throughout the country, and basically make everyone freeze in their homes, and which would greatly diminish the political and social support for the war. I think. I mean, not saying that it would bring it below 50% and like take the complete sap the will out of Ukraine, but it would do a lot of damage if Russia decided to go through with that, which would be pretty brutal if they did. But it seems like they might. Um, Christopher, so you agree that we have to understand that this conflict is more than just about Russian Federation conquering Ukraine, that they have a larger agenda, re geostrategic security. I mean, I would say it's even bigger than that, man. Like you're looking at an event, you're looking at simultaneous events going on in the world right now that have basically created a perfect storm in terms of geopolitics. Like you have um, the two biggest ones are deglobalization, where I mean, basically, like the U.S. led global order is kind of collapsing in on itself, and like politically, like there's a lot of rhetoric that like like they're trying to prevent that from happening, but like you have to look at the economic realities of it. Like the American population does not and never really has benefited economically from globalization. We benefited from it in terms of security. So it was basically like we'll let, and this was a deal that was signed. You can look up like the Bretton Woods Accords, but it was signed after World War II, and it was signed in order to combat the Soviet Union because the U.S. believed that we couldn't possibly take on the Soviet army. It was too big, too much equipment, too much manpower, and it was battle hardened. It just fought a huge war with Germany, and it pretty much beat them all by themselves. But the West decided that they would help all these countries around the world rebuild and get wealthy. So it was like carrot for stick. It was like basically we'll let you sell your stuff to America and get rich in return. You let us, write up your security strategy, and if we ever go to war with Russia or the Soviet Union at the time, then you guys have to join in and fight with us. So like that was the deal, And since Russia collapsed, like it's been moving on inertia. Like there's a lot of people still getting rich off of globalization, but like the American public, like the average working man in America, like there's no factory jobs, there's no um, like we don't like build really anything. It's like service-based economy, and then like like several. I mean, it's still like a good mix of things, but like the average American on both sides of the political aisle, Democrat and Republican, agrees that like it would be better if jobs were in America than if they were overseas and we just bought the stuff, right? So, uh, like we can we can try and push people all we want to like try and hold this thing together, but like the main glue that held it together was like everyone was getting rich off of America, so everyone was all about it. But like the more trade embargoes we put on China and on Europe and like all these different places, and like I mean you've seen it like through Trump and then through the Biden era as well. Like we've been signing trade deals. Like the U.S. hasn't had trade deals with anyone for like ever. Like we have basically allowed free trade to come in. The fact that we're signing trade deals should tell you that like the era of global trade is like disappearing. So like that combined with a population collapse and basically all of the industrialized world is creating a lot of instability in all these different countries. And like I would argue that Russia saw all this instability coming, as many people actually did. Like there's a lot of people that knew that 2020 to 2030 was going to be tough times around the world, and they decided that if they were going to act, it had to be now. Like now was the only time. And that's the war between Ukraine and Russia is not a catalyst for all these global problems. It's just a symptom. And that, I mean, that's my opinion. You can debate it if you want, but there's a lot of other people who hold that opinion as well. All right, I'll answer a few more questions here, then I'll go call it. What is the supply truck situation for Russia? I mean, how far away from the railheads are they operating? And have you seen them failing when operating from these? It seems like, you know, the supply problems for the Russian side, uh, they would have had supply problems near Liman where they were fighting before, but now there's a rail line moving down through Trotsky to Starobilsk. So there's multiple different areas where they can disembark and put stuff onto trucks and move it to the front. So I think the supply situation for Russia has improved in several different areas, including the Kherson region. There's no rail connections through any of this. So really the difference in the Kherson now, since when things get off their boats and stuff, or the pontoon bridges, instead of having to travel all this distance here, they only have to go this far now. So, I mean, in my opinion, this is better, like in terms of supply at least. How do we donate money to your channel in this chat? Should be a super chat mechanism that's like part of like your chat box. I've never done it before, to be honest with you, but like you probably have to connect your account or something to YouTube, and then it's like I think YouTube like the bottom feeders they are take like 20% of it or something, but most of it goes to me though. Are there any Americans around you that you can talk about this, or do most people support the Biden regime's line? I mean, I pretty equally have like friends that are Democrats and friends that are Republican. Like I'm not either. So I know a lot of people on both sides. I would say that most people are pretty unhappy with the way things are going, regardless. But like some people try to cope with the situation, and they're like, well, Biden's better than the last guy, or you know, whatever. I actually do like know people in government too, and in the military, and I mean, mixed opinions on the conflict. Like, we shouldn't be doing this, or like, well, we kind of have to do this. So, I mean, I know a wide range of people. Like, I couldn't say a majority of people that I know personally like see it in any given way. I think most people I know are just like, yeah, war's bad. This is bad. That's like the one thing we can all agree on. Right. No, I don't have a military background. I've actually thought about it recently though, about going basic. Um, all right, this is the last question I'm going to take. From user, is the difference in train gauge causes major issues for NATO to Ukraine supply? So just so you guys know what he's talking about, um, we'll see if we can find. Okay, so Ukrainian rail network uses 520 millimeter broad gauge, which was adopted by the Russian Empire and thus inherited by the Soviet Union and its successors, as well as Finland and Mongolia. Most EU countries use 435 millimeter standard gauge. So let's see if we can pull up an image of what this looks like. None of these. Okay, I see. So the narrow, so this is the standard gauge, and then this is the offset. So yeah, I mean the rail gauges for the Russian trains are wider and broader than they are for European rail networks, which means that you cannot drive a train straight onto Ukrainian tracks from Europe. What they have to do is they would have to, shit, I guess like I'm gonna find a way to like draw this. Where's Lviv? We're here. There's probably no. I think this town that we talked about in the north has a railroad going through it, right? Kovel. So what they would have to do is they would have to drive a train up like to here, right beside another train, and say the first train is on the narrow gauge, and or on the normal gauge, and the second train's on the broad gauge, and you would have to find a way to transfer everything. Why did I pick this color? You'd have to find a way to transfer everything over to the other train. So there's like probably different mechanisms for this. Like I've heard, and Russia does the same thing with China because China's not on the same rail gauge either. I've heard that like sometimes, I guess it's possible that you can like pick up like the train car itself, like pick it up off of its off the wheels. I guess they're not called wheels; they're called something else. But and then set it down onto like a new set of wheels. There's also like if you're loading equipment onto like typical standard shipping containers, you can do it kind of the same way that you do it at a port, where you just like have a crane setting up over top of the train that can pick up shipping containers and move them onto flatbeds on the other train, or you can just unload the train and reload another train. Like there's other various different methods, but it does create a bit of a choke point in supply because obviously it would be better if you can just take one train and just like send it. Jesus, that was bad. And just, send it right down the tracks without stopping, to all the way to its destination. All right. Zarathustra, thanks for the 10 euros. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I hope you guys figured out and resolved the super chat thing. All right, guys, that's it for me today. I stayed over a lot longer than I said I was going to. I hope I answered all you guys' questions. I am planning on doing this every week now on Saturdays, so a little later in the day. Maybe I'll post another poll this week to see if there's like a specific time period during the day that most of you guys can join. Other than that, I'm going to keep up with the daily updates. Thanks for supporting me. Thanks for watching and participating. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next